Among the many varied Yuletide traditions, there are a fair number with somewhat romantic overtones. One of the foremost of these is the tradition of a kiss beneath a bough of mistletoe. This odd little plant has a number of curious cultural associations and seems to fill a variety of roles. It may be regarded as an emblem of good fortune, or a harbinger of tragedy, or even a pretext for romantic pursuits. There is a similar variation to be seen in the actual plant and its connections with other forms of life. For birds, it can be an important food source. For humans, it is a poisonous plant best left to display. For whatever tree or shrub it is growing on, mistletoe is a rather insidious little parasite. To begin with, it may be best to define just what mistletoe is. As it turns out, there are hundreds of plant species that might be defined as mistletoe. They are found within the plant order Santalales, sometimes collectively known as the sandalwoods. While not all plants within this order are mistletoes, all mistletoes are found within this order. Though individual species ranges may be limited, representatives of the group overall may be found on every continent apart from Antarctica. The underlying connection between these various species is their hemiparasitic way of life. That is, they rely upon a form of parasitism for some of their resources, but not all. More specifically, a mistletoe uses its host plant as a source of water and minerals, but it carries out its own photosynthetic processes. Thus, at least some of its organic molecules are supplied in-house, so to speak. Additionally, a typical mistletoe grows attached to a branch of its host plant, often quite far from the ground. This habit can be visually striking, particularly in the winter months of colder climates. As many mistletoe species are evergreen and the plants they parasitize may be deciduous, the result is a proliferation of green patches among otherwise barren branches. Little surprise that some cultures have regarded mistletoe to be a symbol of fertility. For the sake of sanity and clarity, let us focus upon just a few representative species. When people think of mistletoe, they are most likely to be thinking of the species Viscum album, commonly known as European mistletoe. This is an evergreen plant with oval leaves and distinctive white berries. The species name album means white. As for the genus name, it shares its root with the word viscous and bears some connection to the stickiness of this plant's seeds. There is a related species, Viscum cruciatum, found in more southerly parts of Europe. This species has red berries rather than white. The species name in this case refers to a cross and may be based upon the 4 petals found in the flowers. In the New World, we have Eastern mistletoe, Phoradendron leucarpum. A very rough translation of this scientific name would be carried on a tree and has white fruits. Though the genus is different, this plant has a habit and appearance quite close to the European mistletoe. As may be expected, it is used for Christmas decorations in much the same manner, at least when artificial plants are not used instead. One might ask how these plants manage to get into the tree branches to parasitize them. Alas, they do not climb stealthily up the trees in the dead of night or anything quite so dramatic. Instead, most mistletoes rely upon birds. Simply put, the birds consume the berries, but do not destroy the seeds during digestion. What comes out of the other end of the bird may often find its way out while the bird is perching in a tree. How convenient. Even after a tour of an avian intestine, the seeds tend to be quite sticky, often sufficiently adhesive to effectively cling to whatever branch they might happen to land upon. From there, it is simply a matter of germination and branch invasion. A somewhat more unusual pattern is found in several species of dwarf mistletoe in the genus Arcuthobium. Dwarf mistletoes tend to be leafless plants with a yellowish hue. They most often parasitize conifers like lodgepole pine. Instead of relying upon birds for seed dispersal, one might say that the dwarf mistletoes take matters into their own hands. The berries each contain one seed, and each berry ripens slowly, sometimes taking more than a year to fully mature. Eventually, these little fruits build up an alarming degree of internal water pressure. The final result of this is an explosion that sends the seed flying at up to 60 miles per hour, sometimes landing a good 50 feet away. Regardless of the means of transportation, the end result for a successful mistletoe is a sticky seed adhering to the surface of a tree branch. Rather than proper roots, a typical mistletoe produces a haustorium. This is a structure that pushes its way into the host plant stem and links up with its internal xylem tissues. To put it another way, it connects itself to the plant's internal plumbing and begins drawing off some of the water and minerals originally obtained from the soil below. There is a considerable variety of haustoria among the different species of mistletoe, so far as the fine details are concerned. However, the basic pattern is fairly consistent overall. In cross-section, an established haustorium will often appear as a series of greenish patches of wood fused with the surrounding wood of the host tree. It might easily evoke the sense of something almost cancerous and certainly invasive. Interestingly enough, the mistletoe is doing something quite similar to what a number of arboriculturists have been practicing for millennia. It is possible to affix a branch taken from one tree to another tree, provided the two trees are sufficiently similar. For example, one could take a branch from a peach tree and graft it onto a cherry tree. However, one could not graft a peach tree branch onto an apple tree. It would be possible to graft an orange tree branch onto a grapefruit tree, but it wouldn't work at all for a pear tree. In any case, when the branch and tree are sufficiently similar, all that is essentially required is lining up the vascular tissues and securing the grafted branch into place. The internal xylem and the outer layers of phloem must connect enough for adequate nutrient transfer. As phloem consists of living cells, there is a degree of healing that tends to close the gaps in this tissue at the very least. Eventually, the newly deposited layers of vascular tissue grow in a continuous fashion between the branch and the tree. What mistletoes do is essentially forcibly graft themselves into the branches of their host plants. The internal xylem tissues become effectively fused. The more external phloem also fuses until the mistletoe is functionally incorporated into the vascular system of its host. While the mistletoe is most often not closely related to its host tree, the degree of success varies depending upon the host species. As with grafting, some combinations are more viable than others. One of the more important aspects of a given mistletoe species is the host or hosts that it can parasitize. Details vary greatly from species to species, but it is not uncommon for a single sort of mistletoe to infest several different sorts of tree. Returning to Viscum album, for example, one can find this species growing on willows, hawthorns, and lindens. They seem to grow especially well on apple trees, lime trees, and poplars. In contrast, Phoradendron leucarpum seems to mostly favor various sorts of oak and maple trees. Indeed, it is so often found on oak trees that it is sometimes referred to as oak mistletoe. While it is important to consider what the mistletoe is taking advantage of, I would be remiss if I didn't mention at least one creature taking particular advantage of the mistletoe. To be more specific, the eastern mistletoe is fed upon by a species of lycaenid caterpillar. The great purple hairstreak, Atlides halesus, is a striking species with iridescent blue patterns on the upper surface of its wings, while the underside has a sort of dusky purplish hue. The back edges of these wings have slender projections that act as false antennae to deceive predators. These hair-like structures are the basis of the common name of hairstreak. These particular lycaenids feed entirely and exclusively upon mistletoe. Eggs are laid on mistletoe plants, and the early instar larvae feed on the youngest leaves. Their jaws aren't strong enough to feed on the older, tougher leaves at first. The caterpillars are green and vaguely slug-like in overall appearance, blending in quite well with the mistletoe foliage. Despite this camouflage, they do have a degree of toxicity derived from the poisons in the leaves they devour. Sometimes, in a rather amusing twist, the mistletoe is completely defoliated by the voracious feeding of these little creatures. Even an evergreen parasite may find itself leafless and thoroughly exploited. Such is often the way in nature. Virtually every species ends up playing different roles, depending upon what it is interacting with. This versatility is also seen in dwarf mistletoes. Despite their incendiary berries, these plants are often favored as nesting sites for various birds, including the northern spotted owl. More generally, quite a number of bird species seem to favor clumps of various mistletoe species as nesting sites. Indeed, some species of mistletoe are regarded as keystone species by many ecologists. For the sake of clarity, a keystone species may be regarded as a species that affects the local ecosystem to a disproportionately high degree. In some regions at least, where certain types of mistletoe are present, biodiversity appears to be significantly higher. So, despite the generally detrimental effects on their host plants, these little hemiparasites often have a positive overall effect on their surroundings. For an organism versatile enough to act as a home, a food source, and a parasite, it doesn't seem like much of a stretch for it to fill its decorative role around the holidays as well. In fact, it may even be uniquely appropriate, all things considered. After all, a romance may be regarded as the intimate association of two otherwise disparate creatures. In some cases, it may seem quite exploitative and draining, and even parasitic. In other cases, it might be the beginning of a new home. Some romances can be quite poisonous, while others might be deeply sustaining. Some might even be described as potentially explosive. So perhaps there is something almost eerily appropriate about a kiss shared beneath the mistletoe. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed today's little foray into the unknown. If you are still curious and wish to venture a little further, here are a few things you might consider looking into. If you found this video enjoyable, do feel free to leave a like. If you believe others might enjoy it, by all means, share. If you wish to see more of this channel, a subscription should prove quite helpful. Until next time.